This is going to be, full disclosure, this is going to be a worse version of a talk that Dave Marr did at our last mini summit in Denver. I will not pretend to be able to do that with the same elegance and sort of breadth of experience that he has, but I will try my best to talk a little bit about the AI System Bill of Materials guide that we have brought. Yep. Oh, I need to plug it in. Imagine that. It is lovingly known in Sweden as 3 sausages. So the Ericsson office is a sausage factory. Okay, so before I start walking through this guide, and a lot of the guide will be familiar for those of you that are familiar with 5230, because it's based on the same format and same concepts, basically, but extending those to AI. I just want to sort of give full recognition to the work done by the co-chairs of this group, Dave Marr and Magic Crawford. They've done terrific work in bringing this forward. I think Dave in his talk about this said that it was a year-long process of getting this out. I think that's not quite fair, actually, because it's a much longer process than that. Before the actual work started, it was a 6-month process to get us to the point where we could determine what is it that we actually want to do, where can we bring value in this field. And even further back than that, it's actually almost a 10-year journey now that Chain has been sort of leading of getting OpenChain to the stage of its project where we have the trust in the supply chain and where we have the sort of importance in the supply chain that anyone actually cares that we put this thing out. Without that, it would just be sort of a document but I do think that it's sort of standing on shoulders of giants that enables us to have this impact. So with that said, let's walk a little bit through this guide, and we can probably skip the least interesting stuff of introduction and the terms. Some of the terms are interesting though. Sorry, I need to mirror my screen here, otherwise I will never be able to do this. Now I'm seeing the same thing you are. That helps me a lot, otherwise I will be standing there. Okay, so we have the normal definitions, but then we have a fairly broad definition of artificial intelligence. That's by design. We wanted that to be broad. We have not defined this to be only open source AI or open AI, whatever the term is. We purposefully wanted to stay out of that controversy, realizing that we will probably have to deal with it no matter the terminology. So it's probably going to end up on our plate. A lot of these new licenses are either open source inspired or they are open source licenses. But building that into the definition here wasn't useful. We felt we'd rather have a broad scope. And then we have what someone lovingly referred to yesterday as the most buzzwordy title of any talk at this conference, Artificial Intelligence System Bill of Material, AI SBOM, has two great buzzwords in it. And it's essentially what we're saying is this is for listing the components of relevant information about the parts that make up an AI system. Let's see, where else are we? So the guide, the actually interesting part here, and this will be very relevant to all of those of you that read 5230, we come back to you need to have a written policy. Write down your policy. What is your AI system? What is your actual policy here? Document that, right? Unless you have a documented policy, there's no way of actually sort of being consistent in these things. So very basic, but that same requirement exists. And then you need to have competence in your organization. I think this is important, and to what Sandra talked about before with their AI office, I think we'll probably see an emergence of AI OSPOs or AO SPOs. However, the term will will develop. But I do think that it's very important when companies develop these that they look to the competence they have in-house in relation to open source, because a lot of the questions are really the same or really similar. So we do have the competence in-house to deal with that. So rather than trying to build parallel structures, I think organizations should focus on sort of building out the structures they have in place and ensure that AI can fit in there. I think this guide is, well, it doesn't mandate that, of course, but it sort of leads you in that direction, if that's a direction one wants to take. So anyhow, we're saying that an organization shall identify the roles and corresponding responsibilities of these roles that impact the performance and effectiveness of the program. And some examples here: governance, security, safety, privacy, development, supplier management. And this should, of course, be documented as well. It's nothing strange with that, but it should be documented and it should exist. And of course, awareness. If no one is aware of the policy, it's not much use, right? So ensure that there is a program to make these participants aware of the AI SBOM policy, and that they understand the relevant business objectives and how their contribution impacts the effectiveness of the program and the implementations of not following the program requirements. Then there's verification material and rationale, same as any here. The program scope, here I think we're more explicit than in 5230 in sense of you can define or you should define the scope of the program. That could be for an organization, a single product line, entire department, or just a small team of people. So it's important that that is well documented so that we can understand what is the scope of your program, or rather someone reviewing this can understand the scope of your program. And then license obligation. And here I think, again, it's really good that we have this because it ties back into the work done by so many people over so many years in understanding the various open source licenses and its obligations. So again, I'd really think it's important sort of to connect back to all that knowledge, institutional knowledge that builds up in a lot of different organizations so that they can be part of reviewing it. But I also think this is an area for collaboration. It's one of these things. All of us have to understand these obligations and how they apply in the AI case. So I think this is probably an area where we can collaborate and can come up with sort of a defined set of, this is our common belief that these are the requirements in this license and it should be applied like this in the AI case. So I think that's an area for collaboration, both in the wider open source community, but in the organization, I think it's important to lean on sort of the experience gained from all the work on open source license compliance previously done. We do have transparency obligations that a process should exist to ensure there is the necessary transparency from a regulation standpoint is there and is available, and that you are responsible for ensuring that you have that. And that should, of course, be documented. Then there is the question of access that Sandra talked about a little bit before as well, I think. How do we ensure that there should be a way to publicly identify how do you make a AI SBOM compliance inquiry? Could be, name on your webpage, in your product documentation, but it should be there and it should be public. Then the best way of transferring or actually giving that access, that's of course not specified here. We're just saying you need to have a way to contact us. And your program should be effectively resourced. You can have the best policy in the world, you can have the best people, but if you don't give them sort of the time and the training to actually perform their tasks, well, this program kind of falls apart. Same as with anything, right? So we think it's important that you have that documented, and that creates resilience in an organization as well. And then it's the AI system bill of materials itself, and here we are fully format neutral. It could be SPDX, Cyclone DX, or any other format. But it should account for inbound materials from third parties. And then, of course, that should also be documented, both the format and the SPOM itself. And then governance, that the organization should set up and have a governance framework for AI, for the policies, and helping to ensure that AI systems are developed and managed responsibly. And these are, of course, then legal requirements, both on the EU AI Act and other global AI legislation that is yet to appear or have appeared. This is a constantly developing field, so one needs to keep an eye for that. I saw that just recently the UN announced 2 new United Nations bodies dealing with AI. So I'm sure that there will be further output from that. And basically, that is the entirety of the AI SBOM guide. I think the more important part here is that it is a very well-written document. It's a very good place to start. It sets sort of the groundwork for a lot of things. You can, of course, do things a lot better than what this guide, requires, but it sets the baseline. And it's important in the same way that 5230 was important, because before we had this, everyone were trying to figure this out on their own. Now we have a baseline. This is something we can iterate on. I think the public comment period of this document is over. Yes. Yes. So it's now finalized, as well as anything can ever be finalized in open source. And with AI, I'm sure there will be developments that will lead to this being updated. I'm sure that we'll work on a next iteration on this, but at least for now, this version of the document is stable and is being brought out. Other than that, I think we can maybe move over to some Q&A if people actually have questions. I think we have like 5 more minutes until we need to be back on track.
And I think there's another microphone here in case people have any questions. So, Cornelius.
I have a question. I only briefly looked at the Finos AI governance framework, but I was wondering if you consider that, if that would be a governance framework in the sense of your document, and also if there are any other templates for policies or something you would already consider as something to recommend.
I've also only briefly looked at the Finos one, but yes, I would see that as sort of governance framework. But I couldn't advise on if it's the perfect one or not, but it certainly meets the requirement of having a governance framework. It's how I usually tell it when it comes to 5230. It says that have an open source policy. A valid interpretation of that requirement is, our open source policies, we don't use open source. I mean, that's a really bad open source policy, but it is a valid way of fulfilling that requirement, right? So I will say yes to your question, but I'm sure there's tons of other things coming out, and I'm sure the education and reference groups will sort of be developing those kind of templates as well, if there's an appetite for that, and if there's sort of, people have the time and resources to do it. But I agree that it would be valuable to have sort of such reference materials. But they would be provided as reference materials. It's not for us to sort of determine that you need to have this exact process.
Just to add, in case it's helpful, for us, we started by putting together a policy that was really comprehensive of the use that we make of AI in-house. Then we started expanding the policy towards the development of AI technology, for example, by specifying in open source processes what are the steps that we should be taking. But we were missing something that puts together all the processes in place, and that's when the guidance came in. We knew what is the use of AI that we wanted to make, we knew what was the ethical stand that we wanted to do, but we were lacking a documenting process that puts everything together in a way that is comprehensive and is consistent across the business. So I will say that taking care of both policies will be equally important.
Yeah, and we have a sister ISO standard, this is the SPDX. Now I would recommend also to have a look at the 3.0 or 3.1, where they have an AI and a dataset profile. And I already observed in the creation of both, so that people should also communicate with each other. But that is, I think, also a good source, because and as I think that was also the spirit of OpenChain, etc., to be really on this most generic, highest level, to really cover everything. And if you want to go deeper, I think also the SPDX and dataset work group would be a good point to discuss then those materials.
Alrighty, thank you. And just so people know, the AI document, sort of our one, references other ISO standards, including SPDX, but the current ISO standard of SPDX is, I think, 2.2? Yeah. So it doesn't yet include the AI profiles, but as Marcel said, absolutely, you should check them out for implementation. Any further questions for Jimmy?
Good, then I'm free.
You're free.